What's up, boys? I'm Shock. Welcome back to the channel. In case you're new around here, I'm a multi-rank 1 challenger mid laner, and I played pro play for about 4 years. Today we'll be doing a Cassiopeia guide, and Cassio is my most played champion of all time. I've played 1,000 Cassio rank games on my main alone. She was my first champion that I played back in Season 5 to get into Hailu in the first place, and I estimate that over my entire career, over scrims, solo queue, boot camps, all the different accounts I've played on, everything, I have somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 Cassiopeia games. So basically what I'm saying, guys, is I might know a thing or two about the champ. I think Cassiopeia is an excellent champ to have in your champion pool for ranked. She's an extremely good counter pick, and while she does take some practice to master, she has a lot of situations where she's very good in. She carries really hard, and she can shut down enemy team comps really easily. So it's a really nice champ to have in your kind of wheelhouse, and also she's just really fun. So Cassio runes these days are actually a lot simpler than they used to be. Conqueror is just kind of the best keystone nowadays. Compared to Phase Rush, Conqueror is just really valuable. It kind of outperforms damage and healing wise. So while it used to be that you kind of chose between Conqueror and Phase Rush, honestly I just recommend taking Conqueror all the time. And then your runes are this tree is kind of set in stone. So here Cassio absolutely needs Presence of Mind. She's very mana hungry, and also this allows you to regen quite a bit of mana during the lane. And these two, they just don't do that much on Cassio. I guess Triumph can help you sometimes, but Mana Flow, Presence of Mind, excuse me, is just extremely valuable. You kind of need to take it. Then here, between Tenacity, Attack Speed, and Bloodline, well, you don't really auto-attack on Cassio, so the only real choice is Tenacity. But that's really useful. Helps you against all the CC, especially because you're a shorter range champion. So Tenacity is very valuable. There's basically no point taking the other ones. Now here you do have a couple choices. I'd say Last Stand is the best overall, but if you're against a very tanky team comp, you could take Cut Down, and it might result in more damage overall. But honestly, these runes don't really provide you with that much anyway. Their effect is very minimal, so it doesn't matter too much. You can just default to Last Stand and it'll probably be fine. So for secondary runes, there are quite a lot of choices. I'd say probably the standard is to go Mana Flow and Transcendence as your minor runes. So this gives you, again, it gives you a lot of mana, which is very useful for Cassio. And also Transcendence just gives you more ease, more Qs. Because Cassio is a DPS champ and you're always using your spells on cooldown in a team fight, Transcendence is very valuable. It used to be that you would take Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter instead, but after the Ravenous nerf, this isn't as good. It is still a decent option because Cassio uses it so well. But it's not. It used to be that you would just take this rune page all the time and there was basically no room for anything else. So this can be a pretty good option. It gives you really good scaling. I think Ravenous has probably the best scaling. If you get all 5 of your stacks and you get really late in the late game, this is very good. But I don't really recommend it as the default anymore, but it is still quite good. So the next one you can take is the Resolve page. And within this, you do have a lot of options for, again, not quite as good scaling as Ravenous, but still pretty good scaling, kind of strong mid-game strength. You can go Conditioning Overgrowth. This gives you a lot of extra tank stats and a lot of extra HP, which is very helpful when you're playing the short range champion that is basically going to take some damage pretty much no matter what. Like in other kind of champions that take this Resolve page, you can change this to other things. So for example, if you're really scared about getting poked out, you can swap to Second Wind. If you're laning versus an assassin, you can take Bone Plating. You can even take Unflinching for extra tenacity. You can take Revitalize if you want shields. Heals, excuse me. So there's a lot of stuff you can do in here. You can kind of just mix and match. I wouldn't take really anything from the top row, but you can just mix and match in here based on what you need. Now the final one is Inspiration. This I would only take very rarely on Cassio. And this also might just be something that you only do in high elo. So in my opinion, when you're in very heavy skill shot matchups, Biscuits and Time Warp are extremely valuable. That being said, if you're not if you're kind of in the lower elos and you're not really good at really using your movement speed to the maximum, you might find these matchups easier just by taking Second Wind. And that's because Time Warp Tonic allows you to dodge that harass, but if you can't dodge it reliably, then Second Wind is just going to outperform it. So this is kind of up to you. I would say though, against champs like Syndra, Biscuits Time Warp are extremely valuable. The movement speed makes such a big difference. But this is a very early game page, and it's really because the matchups, at least in high-low without it, are pretty unplayable. But yeah, so you can see like she has a lot of different options. You can use all these secondary trees and all for different things. And another thing I would say is there isn't a huge difference between them. You know, they're relatively even in power. I wouldn't say there's one that's like clearly ahead of the other. So where you can like min-max a little bit, there's not going to be like a crazy big difference if you do the wrong one. So finally, for these minor runes here, it does depend a little bit on your matchup. I would say this is your default, you know, the ability haste, really good since you'll be using your E and your Q so much. Adaptive Force, obvious, and then Armor or MR depending on the matchup. Now, one thing I will say, and again, unless you're very high low, I probably wouldn't worry about this, but there are some matchups where you can't get priority without the attack speed rune. But honestly, guys, if you're below like maybe Master Tier, I probably wouldn't even worry about this. It's really like you're going to have to know the right time to take it. Otherwise, you can just go to ability haste and you'll always get like really high value out of it. But just know that there are cases where attack speed can be good, mainly if the mid wave is going to be like extremely contested. It's not clear who gets priority. And that sort of situation, the attack speed can make a difference. But otherwise, just go ability haste. The Cassio's items are a little bit different than other champs, but the starting and like early game items are going to be pretty similar. So if you're in like an even or hard matchup, and especially if you have Time Warp Tonic, you want to start Corrupting Potion. This is mainly just like if you need the HP. Otherwise, you'll be wanting to go Tier and 2 potions. This is definitely the better option. You kind of just like you go Corrupting Potion if you have to. Otherwise, like Tier is going to be better. It's going to give you more mana overall. It allows you to hit you know, your max tier earlier. So I guess like just if you're in a matchup where you feel like you need the Corrupting Potion, you can take it. Otherwise, you're going to find Tier and 2 potions to be a better start. One other thing that I don't have here that you could consider is you could start Sapphire Crystal and Refillable. The reason you would do this is if you really feel like you need a lot of sustain, but you want to be greedy and not really go Corrupting Potion. I have seen this a couple times. And it can also be good if you want to like rush Last Chapter and just like delay your tier a little bit. But honestly, I don't really like it too much, but I guess I'll just let you know that it is an option. But personally, I think the tier is kind of just like the best all round and Corrupting Pot if you're not sure. When it comes to the early buys, as with every AP champion, Dark Seal, probably most OP item in the game. Make sure to pick it up. It's insanely efficient. And if you play well, you should keep a lot of your stacks. You know, you shouldn't be dying too often. If you didn't start a tier, absolutely make sure to pick up a tier on your first base. You're gonna need it basically. Cassio like chews through mana, so you really need it early in the game. Now, next is Lost Chapter. So if you can rush a Lost Chapter, it's very nice to pick up. Once you get it, it kind of, because Cassio actually sustains quite a bit off the wave. Once she has a lot of mana, this actually like increases your sustain like HP wise as well as mana wise, and it means you can stay in lane for a really long time. And also because Cassio is like pretty decent at farming jungle camps, once you get Lost Chapter, you can actually start doing some camps if you get the opportunity. We'll talk about it a bit later, but sometimes you can like do early raptors, like enemy raptors and stuff. Now, for defensive items on Cassio, it's actually a bit different. So the first thing is that because Cassio has like a fairly decent option to just rush Everfrost and stuff, you can start with Kindle Gem as opposed to like Seekers or Null Magic Mantle. So the reason you would do that is, you know, other champs that say build Ludens, they don't really have the luxury of just rushing a Kindle Gem. But you could go with Kindle Gem, and that way you don't have to buy these like armor or MR stats. You can just buy the HP, which is like fairly equivalent. That being said, you don't always want to go Everfrost. So you might find some games that the Kindle Gem actually isn't worth it, and you would prefer to rush one of these. We'll talk about, you know, which item you should rush mythic-wise a bit later. But ultimately, it's just like a really good defensive option. So if you don't end up picking that up, Seekers can be quite good. You can build it into Zhonya's, and this is pretty nice. Just overall, one thing I say normally is that if you pick up Seekers, often it means you can't contest the wave because you actually lack the mana. But this isn't really the case on Cassio because you will be starting that tier. So on champs where you go tier, you can afford to be a bit. You can buy Seekers a bit more often without feeling too bad about it. You know, if you buy Seekers on, say, LeBlanc, you're probably not going to have the mana to actually like contest your opponent anymore. But on Cassio, with all your extra mana, you can actually buy Seekers and still be fine. So normally I say only buy Seekers against all-in AD mids, but on Cassio, you can actually buy it against pretty much any AD mid, and you can be happy with it. Although, that being said, you don't need to buy it versus every AD mid, but if you feel like you need it, if they have a lot of AD, like an AD mid jungle, or you're finding the matchup difficult, you can go for it. Now the next thing, Null Magic Mantle, I have put this in here, and the one like big difference Cassio has compared to other mages is that she can't buy boosts. So that means that you can't rush Merc Treads, which in a lot of matchups can actually be quite annoying. So in that case, you have a couple options. Either you can just rush the MR, or you can just go the Kindle Gem, because oftentimes if you're rushing this MR, you might just be sitting on it. You know, not every game where you'd want, say, Merc Treads, would you want, say, a Banshee. So in those games, you know, if they have AP but they don't really have any tenacity, you could just, I mean, if they don't have any CC, you could just buy the Null Magic Mantle and you could build it into something later if you want, or you can just sit on it and eventually you can get rid of it. Otherwise, you can go the Kindle Gem. So you have a lot of options. Boot options, Cass can't build boots. Sorry about that. It's just the way it goes. So for the standard build, I do think the standard option is to go Liandry's, Archangels, and to Rylai's. Obviously this is with a tier, you know, if you've bought it, you know, hopefully you've started a tier, you can grab that. But I do think this is the standard item order, and then after that, like most mages, the Rabadon's Void kind of combo is quite good, though we have delayed it until after the Rylai, so it's like a 4th, 5th combination. And then we have Zhonya's as our last item. Casu, compared to other champs, she can have a full 6 items because she doesn't need boots. Well, she can't even buy boots, but we'll talk about that a bit more in situational items and what that means, because Cassio build is very situational. There isn't, I would say that like these 3 items, like this kind of 3 core of like a mythic, Archangels, and Rylai's is pretty like set in stone, I would say. But after that, you can build like very differently, and it depends a lot on the game. The reasons you build these normally, Liandry's is definitely the highest damage output on Cassio. Synergizes with your damage over time, gives you a lot of ability haste, gives you mana, so it's basically just like everything Cassio wants. And then the next 2 items are both like really strong with Cassio, and also they're very cheap. So 2600 for both of these items, again giving you a lot of mana, gives you healing, gives ability haste. And Rylai's is extremely useful because you can actually, like, there's a, some people don't like this, I think, but I think it's really strong. Rylai's is good because, one, it helps you, like, you know, it helps you kite people, it helps you keep in range of people, but I think one thing that people kind of, like, don't really think about is how much, like, CC, and, like, I guess in the form of slows, that Cassio can put out in a fight. So oftentimes if you hit, like, an AoE Q, or, you know, you just, like, tag someone with an E or something, you know, like, 1 second of 30% slow actually, like, makes a big difference, especially if you've got like your Q on them, right? Because then it's more than 1 second. So with this, you put out a lot of, like, I want to say it's like invisible power. You know, it makes a big difference on the fight, even if it's like not immediately obvious to you. And then these, like, Rabadon's Void, depending on if you need AP or Magic Pen, and then, you know, once you've got one of them, pick up the other, and finally your Zhonya's. So for alternate mythics, I've got all 3 of them listed here, but yeah, well, let's just talk about them. So first, I think Everfrost is just about as good as Liandry's. So they're kind of equal in power, but they're used in different situations. So Everfrost is very good against short-range comps where you're guaranteed to take damage. In that case, like, you really need the extra HP to make playing a short-range champion a lot easier. Also, having the extra slow is very useful against short-range champions. So any melees or any assassins that want to dive onto you. That being said, it does do less damage than Liandry's, and it isn't as good against long-range champions. So if you're against champs that poke, it's unlikely you're ever going to hit them with Everfrost. And instead, you're probably going to be wanting to do more damage with Q, as opposed to looking for more sustained damage. So you're, like, in that situation, you can look for kind of like Q poke with the dot. Compared to these other ones, I don't really like Crown on Cassio that much. It can have some uses, but I think most of the use cases are kind of covered already by Everfrost. I guess, like, the times for Crown would be, well, the reason I don't like Crown for a start is, like, when you're a short range champion, it's very easy to have your Crown shield just popped automatically. That being said, if you are against a lot of short range, and it's kind of like short range burst champions as opposed to short range DPS champions, then the Crown shield can be quite useful. Against, like, short range DPS champions, the slow will probably be more useful than the shield. So you can choose between these. I'd say, like, if you wanted kind of a distribution of how often I buy these, I'd say, like, Liandry, like, 60% of the time, or maybe even 50%, and Everfrost, I'd say, like, 30 to 40%, and then Crown the last kind of 10%, I would say, something like that. So last we have Luden's. Luden's, it's, you know, it's decent. I'd say Luden's is very good for the early game. If you want to just go a full, like, early game two items just like absolutely destroy your opponent. You could go Ludens with Shadow Flame, and that would give you like a high amount of pen, but you don't scale nearly as well as any of the other builds. But it would make you very powerful in the first two items. I'm not totally sure if I'd ever run this personally. I kind of just feel like the other builds are better. But for some reason, if you did just like want to try something out, like you feel like your games are ending like really early, you could do something like tier Luden's Shadow Flame or something like that, and that would give you like an immense 2-item spike. But you definitely wouldn't scale as well past that point. But it would make you quite strong there. Another thing that Ludens can be used for is if you want to do Qmax instead of Emax. And you, again, that would be with the Shadow Flame build. It gives you like a lot of early game power and pen. Overall, though, I don't really like the Qmax build that much anymore. You don't really have that much mana to fund it. It's like a lot more expensive than it used to be. And it's just not as strong as it used to be in general. But to be honest, I might try it out some more. I haven't really played that much Qmax this season. So it has potential. If I kind of like if I come back and I find it's really good, I guess I'll let you guys know in the comments, like in a pinned comment or something. But for now, I don't really think it's optimal. So situational items, there's a lot of them, and you're probably looking at this and thinking like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Because 5 of these are tank items. So let's go into it. So first off, because Cassio is a shorter range champion, but she has like really high sustained DPS, she kind of has the luxury of building tankier than other mages do. So, and another thing is that because you don't have boots, with that extra item slot, you can afford to have more defensive items like in your arsenal in general. So starting off with Banshees and Zhonya's, similar to other mages, you kind of just want to pick these up whenever you need them. So like if you need a Zhonya second, you buy a Zhonya second. You just like, you kind of fit them in whenever you think you need them with both of these two. Zhonya is very good against AD heavy teams, also against some APs. I always bring up Fizz as an example, like if Fizz ults you, often you'll find that the Zhonya is better than a Banshees in that case. So there are a few champs like that where the Zhonya's active is actually more important than the resistances. Banshees, mainly just good for MR. I don't find the Banshee's spell shield to be that useful overall, but the MR is quite nice. And it gives more AP, I think, yeah. So these can be good options, mainly against AD heavy teams or AP heavy teams. Now next is Medjai's. If you get a high amount of stacks on Darksteel, I'd say like 8+, you can consider going to Medjai's. I wouldn't recommend this that much if you're new to Cassio, because you probably will die quite a lot, because she's very vulnerable. You kind of always have to play on a nice edge, although it is a bit easier now that like she kind of has more like natural AP in her build. But Medjai's is very good on Cassio, and the main reason is once you get 10 stacks, you gain extra movement speed. And extra movement speed is insanely valuable on Cassio because a lot of your survivability comes from either kiting people or dodging abilities with movement speed. So I'd go so far as to saying that like movement speed is possibly the most valuable stat on Cassio, and Medjai's being one of the few ways that you can like get movement speed is very nice, especially because of how cheap it is. Now next is Grievous. I hate this item. I actually hate it. The reason is Cassio is not very good at applying tons of AoE. Like the only thing she has are really her ult, her W, and I guess if they all stacked up for Q, but honestly it's not super reliable. You can of course buy this if no one else on your team is buying Healing Cup, but because Cassio's items are so effective damage wise, most of the time you will reduce more effective healing by just doing more damage, by just like buying damage items. But obviously I do buy this every now and then. You know, if for some reason your team is not building Healing Cut and you desperately need it, you can apply it at least to like the most important target, but it's definitely not as good as other champs that either rely more on utility, so champs like Vex, or champs that also just like have tons of AoE. So next is Cosmic Drive. Now this one is quite interesting. I see a few Cassio players playing Cosmic Drive, but honestly I'm not really a fan. The nice things about Cosmic Drive is it gives you like a fair amount of ability haste, and it gives you a lot of movement speed. And as I was saying before, movement speed is very valuable in Cassio. But the reason I don't like Cosmic Drive is first, it's really expensive, it's 3,000 gold, and also it kind of delays items that you really need. So like if you were to pick up, well, first off, you can't really replace Archangels with Cosmic because you just don't really have the mana to like fund your build in that case. So if you are picking this up, it's like you're slotting it like in here somewhere, and you're just like delaying the rest of the build. Personally, I don't feel like Rylai's is really replaceable either. So in any case, you're like buying Cosmic, and it's like yeah, you get like I guess a tiny bit bigger spike at like the 2 items, but you're delaying these really important like 3 and 4th items. You know, you're not going to have your full, like in my opinion, core these like 3 core items here for a long time, and you also delay any other situational items you want to buy. So I think Cosmic is just not really worth it overall. It's too expensive. It pigeonholes your build. Maybe if it gets buffed again, because it did get nerfed pretty hard, we could see it come back, but at the moment I don't really see it as that great an option. Now lastly, we have all these defensive items. I would say you probably only need 1 or at max 2, and I wouldn't really recommend buying one of these until at least 4 items, but preferably like 5 or even 6 items. But you know, if you really need one, you can buy them. So let's talk about like why they're good and when to buy them. So first off, defensive items like this on Cassio are actually quite good because the longer you survive, the more DPS you're going to put out. It's pretty much as simple as that. And she's not like other champions where, you know, burst champions really need that damage because you're either going to kill your opponent or you're not. If Cassio lives longer, most likely she's going to kill her opponent. Spirit Visage. This is the best tank item on Cassio. It increases all healing and shielding by 25%, and that is actually insane. Cassio already heals a ton, and especially if you're running Ravenous in your secondaries, this will increase your healing to like insane amounts. You'll just be like an unkillable machine. This can be very good to buy against AP heavy teams. I actually do prefer this over Banshees. The only problem with it is it doesn't have any AP on it. It does have a lot of HP though, so I don't recommend buying this before, say, your 4th item or even 5th item. But I'd say maybe 1 in every like 10 games I get a lot of usage out of Spirit Visage, and when it is like the game for Spirit Visage, it's like really, really good. It's like actually insane in those situations. Next is Anathema's Chains. This is extremely good if you've got just like 1 champion that can kill you and no one else. So this gives you 650 HP and you take reduced damage from your nemesis. So if you get to like that 3 or 4th items, oftentimes, say if you're against like a Zed or something, if you didn't buy Zhonya's, you can buy Anathema's Chains and you can put it on Zed and he'll just be like so completely useless. So yeah, it's really like, it is quite situational. Only worth buying if there's like 1 Fed member, you know, 1 person that's just like making your life hell every single fight. But in those situations, it's a godlike item. You know, definitely, yeah, it's like later in the build. I really recommend getting these like 3 items here before, you know, you buy anything like this, but once you get to that point, it's really, really good. So next, these are kind of all just like, I'd say these are like somewhat fall into similar categories. I guess maybe not the Stoneplate. I think the Randuin's and Frozen Heart, they're both kind of like anti-AD items. I would say they're a bit different. Like Randuin's a bit more anti-crit. This is Frozen Heart's a bit more like anti-attack speed, a bit better against bruisers. So yeah, you can pick these up. I feel like a lot of the time when you're against bruisers, Anathemas can be quite good, but this does give you extra mana and ability haste. I guess this gives ability haste too. So honestly, I don't buy these very often. I find that it's rarer to need these items than it is the other ones. I think a big reason for that is like Spirit Visage and Anathemas is good because first off, there aren't that many like good MR options on Cassio because she is short range and that shield always gets procced. And Anathemas is like quite good against everything else. But if you are against like a really AD heavy team, buying one of these 2, depending on, you know, if they're crit or attack speed, can be very, very nice. It helps you like win 1v1s against champs that you wouldn't win otherwise. So again, can be good, like kind of 5th and 6th item. Finally, Stoneplate. This can be good like really, really late in the game. It pretty much makes you unkillable for the short amount of time, for the 6 seconds. So if they've got like a big burst window, you know, where it's not really stats, I guess like the raw item stats, but you just need to live for like that 6-second window. In that case, Stoneplate can be good. You can kind of think of it like a GA on another champion, but GA is just like not that good on Cassio because it has AD on it. But I would think of this as a GA. Essentially, it gives you that 6 seconds of where you essentially have a second health bar, and then you can kind of play the game normally after that. I think that's mainly it for items. I would say one thing in general, yeah, I just like coming back to this, I really feel like Everfrost, Liandry's are very similar in power, and it just depends on like what thing, like what situation you're in. But if you just like prefer one over the other and you want to build it all the time, honestly, I wouldn't be too upset by it. They're both quite good. I do think if you're better at Cassio, you can get away with Liandry more often than you probably should, just through good positioning. If you're newer to Cassio, you might find Everfrost to be a bit easier to play. But ultimately, guys, they're both very good. Liandry's a little better. And a bit more use cases, but they're both really good. And I just wanted to say that because I think a lot of the time, like when people come to the builds, they like overcomplicate it a lot. But like realistically, guys, if you build somewhat cookie cutter. You know, you don't have to get the situational items right every game. Obviously, if you do, it helps quite a bit, but the main thing is getting these 3 core items correct. And if you can do that, you'll put yourself in a really good spot most games, because simply put, most games don't go to that like 5-6 item mark, but normally they will go to 3 items. So sums on Cassio, you actually have a lot of diversity. I will say that compared to other champions, having a combat summoner on Cassio is very, very important. So I do think like you take flash basically 100% of the time. But after that, I normally say it's kind of like between like teleport and ignite. But on Cassio, I'd say I'd only take teleport in very, very difficult matchups, like where I literally can't play the game without it. Otherwise, you'll get insane value out of a combat summoner. So first off, ignite can be very good. I'd say this is like, I'd say Ghost actually is probably your default option, but ignite can be good if you're in a shorter range matchup, you know, where you can like pick up kills and snowball. So I think Ghost and Ignite are kind of your defaults. Ghost is very good for like running people down in the lane, very good for skirmishing, very good for team fights. It's just like good overall. I don't know if flexibility is the right word, maybe like a bit more forgiving, like having the extra movement speed can be quite nice. And it also allows you to like play aggressively as well, right? It's not just a defensive summoner. Exhaust can be quite good. There's basically no chance anyone can 1v1 you in short range if you have Exhaust. You have just such insane high DPS, and if people can't burst you, there's basically no chance they can win. Against some champs, you know, that are extremely good at 1v1s, champs like, say, Fiora or Aurelia, if you have Exhaust, or if you have Ignite, they'll struggle a lot against you. So oftentimes these can make the difference, and that'll be pretty important. We'll talk about that a bit later. Other things like Barrier, Heal, and Cleanse, you can take these. I guess like Heal is probably like just a bit worse Ghost, but it can, you know, help you a bit defensively. It's better for jungle mid 2v2s. Don't take Heal very much. Barrier I also don't take too much. I feel like Exhaust is better most of the time, but in some like ranged mage matchups, like maybe Syndra or something, Barrier could be better. And finally, Cleanse, like if they have a lot of CC in their mid jungle, or they have, you know, just some spell that you really need to avoid, like Leona ult or something, Cleanse can be very valuable. And it can make a big difference in your team fighting, because oftentimes, like if Cassio does get hit by a CC, they'll just instantly die. She's very immobile, she's very short range, so Cleanse can help a lot with that. I'd say overall the reason that combat sums are so important on Cassio is, one, like I was saying before, she's very short range, so these like defensive sums help a lot. But also like the way Cassio kind of plays through the early game is very aggressive, so that combat sum helps a lot. And then in the mid game, you'll often be doing a lot of split pushing as Cassio because you're so strong in 1v1s, and with a combat summoner often you can even win 1v2s. So those combat sums help a lot compared to other champions that might take teleport, where they're kind of just playing to base on good tempo, make sure they have TP to get on the map and not miss any creeps. So that's kind of why those combat sums are much better on Cassio. And I would say, in general, unless you really, really need TP, just take Flash and a combat sum and default to Ghost or Ignite. Alright, so now Cassio's abilities. First we have her passive. So the way this works is you gain 4 movement speed per level, just passively, but you can't purchase boots. So this is, it's like a double-edged sword. On one hand, you get a lot of movement speed for free, which is very nice, like you don't have to buy the boots. On the other hand, there are some games where you actually would want to buy boots, so I wouldn't say it's the best passive in the world. But the nice thing, I guess, is that you are getting like free stats, essentially. And it's not a bad passive, and if the game does go really long, it does give you an extra item slot to play with, which makes you very, very strong in the ultra late game. So next we have Q. This it's like a dot effect, it damages people over time, circle skill shot, and it gives movement speed. So this is very important, you know, with you getting this movement speed buff. You know, it's really important you hit these for damage, for movement speed, and also because the poisons will amp your E damage. So yeah, it's really, really important that you hit those. Next is W's. This is probably the biggest thing between, like, you know, why Cassio is so good against like these short range comps, is because with this W here, you can kind of lock down an area and it makes them grounded so they can't dash or flash as long as they're inside it. And also it does a little bit of damage and applies poison to them. Next we have the E. This is a very short cooldown, and it's like, you know, very spammable, very cheap. Now the interesting things is if they're poisoned, they take basically double damage, and they also restore you some HP. So if you do like have a Q or a W on them, you know, the E is going to be doing a lot more damage. Will also be healing you. And finally, something that we'll talk about a lot in the laning phase is if you kill the target, Cassio restores mana, which is very useful for the early game. It can help you like push the lane for free, essentially, because you can think of it in the early game as having an E, sort of like an extra auto attack. So it helps you get prior in a lot of matchups where you shouldn't, and it can be very useful. But yeah, these abilities, they're not very complex, but they do like work well together, and it is extremely important that you are hitting them and like using them well. You know, the difference between placing miasma well and not can often be, difference between just like winning the fight or not. And obviously, if you miss your poisons, your E is going to do very little damage. It's very important you hit those. Finally, we have the ult. The way this works is it's like a cone skill shot, and it stuns anyone that's looking at you for 2 seconds. The people that are looking away are slowed instead, which means that they don't always have to be looking at you for you to use it. Another thing is that it actually does a big chunk of damage. You know, there are times when you and your opponent are both about to kill each other. It can be more DPS in that last second to use your ult than your E. That's a very niche thing, but if you need, for some reason, burst, there are some times where I opt to use ult purely for damage, because it's going to be the difference between like winning or losing that last like 0.5 or second of a fight. Quickly show that, yes, so you can see it can stun, and if you use it from behind, it'll just slow them. There's a lot of like combos you can do with this, so we'll talk about that in the combos section. But just in general, like the way you kind of want to use your abilities, I'd say like Q is a very good poke tool. You know, you can use it from reasonably far range. A lot of poke before team fights, high DPS. It's really important that you use your W well. Generally, you only get one chance per team fight to use your W. So it's really important that you don't waste it and you're like thinking actively about how to use it. Then E, you know, pretty simple. You're probably just gonna be spamming it on someone. And lastly, your ult. Like this can be very team fight defining if you get good combos with it or if you stun a lot of people with it. But we'll talk about it a bit more in combos. Finally, in the order to max things, you max E first, Q second, W third, and put a point in ult whenever you can. For which item, for which ability to start, it does depend a bit on what lane you're in. I'd say if you're not sure what to start E, I would say normally. But there are a lot of matchups where starting Q is good. There are a lot of matchups where starting E is good. Normally I don't put a point in W until level 4, so normally I go like Q, E, E, or I go E, Q, E. The reason is that like once you get more points in E, it becomes more effective. And again, we'll talk about this in the laning phase, but actually when Cassiopeia only has 1 point in E, her all-in is not that strong, but it's when she hits level 3, when she gets that 2 points in E, that she's much stronger. So I really recommend doing either EQE or QEE. We'll talk about like, you know, when to do that and why in the laning phase. Okay guys, let's talk about the Cassiopeia combos. So first we'll do some of the flash combos. So one thing that you can do is you can actually buffer your Q from out of range. So if you cast your Q like over here, like say there's an enemy here, right, and you want to instantly cast Q on them after you flash, you can actually Q and just flash, and it will cast Q automatically when you get in range. You don't need to cast it again. So that can be useful for making sure you get the absolute like quickest Q possible onto someone. I don't use this that much, but there are some times where I picked up solo kills because of this. So next, worth noting is that you actually can't do this with W. So W will cast at max range no matter what. So even if you try and cast W over here, it will just cast at your max range. And another thing I'll quickly say about W is its size does depend like where you cast it. If you cast it right on top of yourself, it's very small. You know, if you cast it up against a wall like this, some of it will disappear inside the wall. So while it's not really a combo, it is kind of important that you think about like how you're going to use this. Like oftentimes placing it just on top of yourself actually like gives whatever champs on you like a fair amount of area around you to play on you. So like casting it, I'd say like a good way to use it is to actually cast it a bit in front of you and then walk into it. So if you have someone right on top of you, I mean, it depends if you need to stop them from using an ability like right now. But if they are like kind of on top of you and you have like a bit of time to work with, actually casting it in front of you and walking in it gives you a bit more area denial. Next, for some ult combos, probably the one that everyone knows is the ult flash. So all you need to do this for this is you need to press alt and then flash forward. This can be very, very useful for surprising people. It can win you a lot of team fights if you flash alt into people. It just does a lot of damage in general. So oftentimes, even if you're not stunning them, it'll actually just like win you the fight. That being said, you are like putting yourself in harm's way. So you got to be pretty sure that what you're doing is worth it, because most likely if you didn't stun them, you're going to die like pretty much instantly afterwards. Unless you have, you know, like a Zhonya's or like enough tank stats. But this is like extremely useful. Definitely want to use my flash for the most on Cassiopeia is either like, you know, flash ulting forward or just using my ult, using my flash defensively. Now, one other thing is there is kind of a weird ulti interaction. If you ult behind you and then you like flash towards them, the animation will actually go the other way. So you can see there, the animation like went backwards, but I still ulted forwards. You can use this if you really want to surprise someone. Like for example, if you're playing lane phase and you're running away from someone, so all you need to do is you need to ult behind you and flash back towards them. So that does have some use cases. I would say most of the time if you're in a team fight, it is easier just to ult forward. But if there are people chasing you, this can be very useful for turning, and I haven't seen anyone predict that. So it can be very, very useful if you get the right situation. Now for just using your abilities in general, obviously the easiest way to like do damage and kind of your trading combo is to hit Q and just chase them down with a bunch of E's, and you want to like auto attack between them. If you're all inning like early in the laning phase, generally you won't have enough mana to like keep that up the whole time, and you also won't have enough CDR. So in the early game, oftentimes you want to like do E's and autos, or at least try weave in a couple autos. It kind of depends like how much mana you have available, stuff like that. But in the early game, especially at level like 2 and 3, an auto attack is almost as valuable as your E. So in the early game, auto attacks, yeah, they can be very, very useful as well. So definitely don't sleep on them. Another thing that kind of goes without saying is that you can follow up like any of your combos with the W. So like if you flash ult into W and that guy can't move afterwards, that can be very useful. We've already kind of talked a bit about like how you want to use a W, but that can be like one really nice way to do it. Talking about some things that are useful in lane, one thing I see people kind of struggle a lot with is wave clear on Casu, and the reason is it's like reasonably expensive and it's also not super easy. But one thing I really like to do is when the wave kind of comes, if you just need to clear it really fast, rather than casting like a Q on the back line and a Q on the front line, if you just come to the side of the wave and then cast a W, often you can poison and AoE the entire thing down, and that way you don't need to press Q on them all. That can save you a lot of mana because otherwise you need to use 2 Qs as opposed to just one. W. So that can be a bit more efficient for you. And another thing you can do actually is you can get rid of the Scuttle Crab's armor with your W for farming a little bit quicker. Something else that could be useful. Another like random thing is in general in the early game, you want to CS with your E, but not your auto attack. So the way I normally do it is when a creep gets low, to guarantee I get it, I like to auto and E it kind of at the same time. And that makes sure that at least one of them is going to kill it and that you're going to get the mana refund on your E. It also means that you can push slightly faster, which can help you get prio in a lot of matchups where you normally shouldn't. And it makes CSing a lot easier. I'd say Cassio is like a champ where CSing is quite easy. So that's really helpful. Yeah, not that many other things I'd say like kind of useful to know in Cassio, though I would say one thing is that even if you don't see the target, if you like Q someone and there's someone in the bush, you will get both the Conqueror stack, you know, Presence of Mind, and this little Noxious Blast like movement speed thing. So you can often use this to kind of check bushes, even if you don't see. Often if you look at your buff bar, you will be able to tell that there is someone in there without actually having to check it, which can be quite useful because, you know, normally if someone gets a jump on you as Cassio, it can be kind of hard to win it, but if you know they're there, it's very, very easy most of the time. Okay guys, so getting into Cassio's lane phase, I'm going to go over quite a few examples because I feel like Cassio's lane phase is like pretty nuanced depending on the matchup. So this is a solo queue game that I played on stream in the preseason, I think, or at the end of last season. I think it was at the end of the last season because it was, I know it was before TP got changed. If this were the case now, I'd probably have Ignite instead. So first is which ability do you start? And this depends a lot on your matchup. So the nice thing about starting E is it does allow you to trade like reasonably well level 1. You can attack with autos and E's. And another reason to start E is that it helps you get priority because you can always just like spend a little mana to E the wave, and that guarantees you get your level 2 and level 3 a bit quicker. Another nice thing about starting E is that your cooldown is a bit shorter, so you don't have as much time to be punished. You know, if you start Q, there are times where you will get punished, although it's a pretty short CD anyway, I think it's 4 seconds, but there are certain champions that will punish you in that like tiny little window. Yeah, so I think now, if at this time I didn't really start Q ever, but I would probably start Q in this matchup these days. So the main reason I would start Q now is versus champions where you're going to get the prior no matter what. So against Vladimir, for example, Vladimir is very bad at pushing in the early game, so you can afford to start Q and get prior no matter what. And the reason that can be good is because it can help you get a little bit of harass in the early game, especially when you have Presence of Mind. The like mana regen that you get from that is pretty decent. So you can afford to harass at level 1. That being said, you actually don't want to use too much mana at level 1. It's really important that you have most of your mana for level 3. But so I guess if you want a general rule, start Q when you don't need E, and the reasons you wouldn't need E is like you don't need to contest prior, you don't need to contest trades, stuff like that at level 1. If you're not sure what to start, just start E, it's safer, but sometimes you can get away with the Q start. So going on the lane, in the early game, you'll see I do harass a little bit with my E. Like I'm saying though, like obviously you don't want to be at full mana until level 3. You do want to use some of your mana obviously so that it regens. But for the most part, I'm going to be just like kind of making sure I hit that level 2 first so I can like leverage that power spike, and looking to auto E trade whenever I can. You also see I'm like auto Eing the creeps, that makes me push a bit quicker, but these days I probably would have started Q in this matchup anyway. Now level 2, one thing I see a lot of players do is they look for the all-in. Now I'm of the opinion that level 2 all-ins as Cassio are not super good. Your mana, like your E, is not very mana efficient until level 3, and it's pretty rare that you can kill someone at level 2. Oftentimes, if you go for the all-in at level 2 as Cassio, your opponent will live, and then you'll just have no mana for level 3. So I kind of prefer to still use level 2. You can look for a little bit of poke, you know, you can throw in 1 or 2 E's, but really, you're still looking to just poke a little and not go crazy until you hit level 3. But once you hit level 3, that's where you like really want to go nuts, and start heavily trading. Like you can see here, I'm still looking for Qs on him. I still am looking to like try fish for autos and Qs on him, but you can see I haven't really committed to a trade. So I'm just going to back up here for a sec. So you can see what I did is I crashed. Now one thing that other champs do is they crash 3 waves and then bounce the wave back. But as Cassio, I actually like to crash 2 waves and bounce the wave back, because what that means is that on this 3rd wave, when you hit level 3, they'll be like in a position where you can look to run them down, as opposed to them hitting level 3 under tower and then having level 4 on the way out. So like, depending on what champ you are, depends on like, you know, different wave control things. I'll probably make a guide on that at some point, but just as Cassio in general, like 2 or 3 wave crash is both good, but a lot of the time 2 wave crash is not good on other champions, but on Cassio it's actually still pretty good. So here, you'll see I'm about to hit level 3, and that's when I'm going to start really heavy trading on him. So just here, I'm still looking for those Qs whenever he goes for CS. It makes it a lot easier. But now if I hit a Q on him and he like tries to move up, I'm going to chase him down with a lot of ease. That was a poor Q there. I should have waited until the creep was a bit lower. And actually, I probably shouldn't even be pushing this wave. Not sure why I'm doing that. Okay, so here I think, yeah. So now I can start heavy trading with him. You can see that there isn't like much Vlad can do. Cassio just in general wins extended trades really hard, and that's what you want to do, guys, and that's really why you save your mana for that level 3 point, is because once you do hit that, your mana to like damage ratio is extremely high, and there's like really no way people can contest you at that point. This guy stays under tower for a while, but I actually want to show you something that happens. So after this wave crashes, I actually TP back. Obviously, like I don't advocate for TP anymore, but the concept will still kind of apply. In general, freezing is very, very good on Cassio, and that's for a few reasons. So the first reason is that you really want extended trades. You want to run people down the lane, and you're not someone that harasses very well under tower. So kind of the optimal like wave state for you is in the middle or on your side. And another like bonus to that is that you can't get ganked. Like Cassio is very immobile, so she's very vulnerable to ganks, but if the wave is on your side, you can deny your opponent a ton of CS. You know, you can see I'm standing in line with the creep, making sure he can't get them, and then every time he comes up, I just kind of like run him off the wave. Another reason that freezing is like pretty good on Cassio is because Cassio's roaming is really terrible. Because you don't have those boots, like you can't buy boots, your movement speed in the early game is always going to be like sort of whatever. And you don't really have great CC for roaming either. So most times that you are going to roam is going to be kind of like what I just did there, where you walk down the river, as opposed to like full committing to like a bot dive, or a top dive or something like that. So, in my opinion, the best way to like kind of play Cassio early is to just like play really selfishly for lane phase. You scale very, very well, so keeping up your CS and just like denying your opponent tons of CS is very, very good. And you can see I'm even willing to like sack HP here, but just make sure this wave is frozen and still on my side. One thing I will quickly say is it's not good to freeze in every single matchup. Like, freezing against champs that roam extremely well is very dangerous. Like if you freeze against a Talon, Talon's just going to roam around and kill your whole team. So you shouldn't roam against every single champion, but there are a lot of them where they can't really roam either, or like they're getting denied so much by your freeze that they don't want to roam. But against those like roaming champs in particular, I would not recommend freezing, but that's the only ones I wouldn't freeze against. You can see again, just like perma keeping the wave here, he's falling behind in CS a lot. I think I'm just going to go to the next example, guys, but mainly I just wanted to show how to play the early levels and how like your wave control can help punish enemies on your side of the lane. So this VOD is going to be of Cassio vs Syndra, and this was from a scrim I played, and this is actually a very difficult matchup, which is why I've got the Corrupting Potion, I've got the Inspiration, and I've got the TP. So I would definitely still run these if I play against Syndra. But one thing is against a lot of these hard matchups, so champions like like Syndra, just like long range control mages, Xerath, champs like that, you actually do have some advantages over them. So the first thing is that Cassio actually has a fair amount of sustain once she has mana. So the later the lane goes, it actually becomes like not too bad to play, but the early game can be quite difficult. That being said, against most of these champions, you are stronger early game, and this is a matchup where it's very, very important that you start E. If you Q like match to Syndra, your Q and her Q both have the same cooldowns. That also means that whenever you go to Q her, you will effectively like root yourself because you're casting a spell. And you will lose prior to Syndra, which is extremely bad because Syndra's very good at harassing under tower, and her level 2 is a lot stronger than your level 2 in terms of like what she can do. Like you can't really run Syndra down because she can stun you away, but Syndra can absolutely punish you if you don't hit level 2 first. So in this matchup, it's mainly going to be about like, in these like hard matchups in general, it's like a test of your mechanics, guys. Like you have to dodge skill shots. You have to be very aggressive. Cassio is not a champ where you can be like, where you, like there's a lot of matchups there's a lot of hard matchups where you play like Victor or Corki or something, where the way you play a hard matchup is you sit under your tower and you play really safe. It's the complete opposite on Cassio. If you're in a hard matchup as Cassio, you can sit under your tower and cry the whole game, but you will be extremely useless. To win hard matchups in Cassio, you have to play extremely aggressive and you have to play on the knife's edge. This can be very difficult to do if you're new to Cassio, which is why like I don't really recommend Cassio as a blind pick. But if you are good at Cassio and you play her a lot, she can be a good blind pick. You can see here I managed to hit level 2 first, and that allows me to avoid a lot of this like difficult part of the lane where Syndra has like a big lead over me. You can see once she hits level 2, I back off a bit more, but now that I have a minion advantage, I can kind of safely CS these from range, and it's sort of hard for her to harass me. I will look to fish with Qs here, but mainly I'm trying to get through these first 3 levels without getting like punished too hard. If Syndra hits a max range stun, it's fine, she can't follow up with an auto or a Q. So that's all good. So you can see the main difference compared to that like Vladimir matchup that we just watched is that I am playing like I'm playing a lot safer, I would say. Like I'm not just like trying to chase her down. It can be very difficult to chase down Syndra. But I'm also like playing aggressively too. Like I'm definitely not letting the wave come to me. I'm still looking to actively push. I'm playing like quite far up in the creeps and like baiting out her Qs and stuff and dodging them. I guess like I'm still not playing like super aggressive. I guess maybe the word I was looking for before is I'm still making it quite volatile. I'm still like making it about skill checks. I guess what I'm trying to say, guys, is like hard matchups in Cassio are not something that you can win passively. You do have to be quite active in it. I guess maybe aggressive is the wrong word, but you can see like what I've done here. I've still been very active in the lane. I'm not just like giving prior. At this point though, I'm actually in a pretty good spot. I've hit level 4 before him, and I still have corrupting potion things left, so the lane's actually in a really good spot. Now here you can see this is kind of the trouble with Syndra, is that like if you try and trade into her like that, she can get a lot of you know, like she has like a free stun on you essentially. Actually, let me go back to this though. So you can see the reason I actually went for this is that she was level 3 while I was level 4, and I had a slight creep advantage. I had 2 range creeps that could hit her. So I did try and go for something here. I wouldn't say it was too bad overall. One thing is that if you guys both get low, it's like a hard matchup, right? If you both get low in a hard matchup, but she has no mana, you can like gradually sustain yourself back up before her mana gets back up. So this is actually not an awful trade. I'm actually okay with this. And you can see on the back end there, I actually managed to use my cube movement speed to dodge another spell. So looking at this, considering this is like one of Cassio's harder matchups, I'm in an extremely good spot. I'm actually up 10 CS, and that's mainly just from CSing better. And I've also dodged enough spells I'm in a good spot. Unfortunately there I took free damage. Probably shouldn't have done that. I was like scared of her contesting my jungler. But ultimately it's fine. And I think that's in a really good spot. Even though I'm low HP, guys, here she doesn't really have the mana to do anything to me anymore. So that's kind of how you play out these harder matchups. You mainly need to just be, you need to be playing on your range, and you need to use your like movement speed and mechanics really well to make sure you dodge things. Now, not a ton changes for Cassio's lane after level 6. The main difference is that one, like, you've got your base off, so you have more mana. And your ult, like, I guess there's a few things you can do with your ult. You can look for a flash ult for a kill, but the main difference hitting level 6 kind of changes for your way, for your lane, is that it changes the dynamic a lot versus like melee champs and versus short range champs. So against champs that kind of like want to dash into you, or like get close to you, once you get your ult, it becomes more and more difficult to them. And so even if you're like somewhat behind, you know, if you're just even, oftentimes once you hit 6, it's just very easy to win. So you can see here, I get the stun onto Lucian and he just like dies. And you'll see this is like the same stuff that happens in every matchup. Pretty much if like you will still play out your lane normally. You will look for Q, harass, and to like chase them down with E. But if they ever get close to you and you hit them with an ult, it's pretty much a guaranteed solo kill. I guess the main difference level 6 makes is it makes it a lot easier to pick up those solo kills rather than just like chunking them out. Yeah, another thing is that once you hit level 6, 1v2ing becomes a lot easier. You know, if you get jungle ganked and you hit a stun on them both, oftentimes you can kill one or even both of them. Quickly, I'll show a couple matchups versus melee champions. Generally, melee champions are easier for Cassiopeia because they're easier for you to run down and just like easier for you to trade on in general. Also, a lot of melee champions are very reliant on sustained DPS. Not all of them, of course. Champions like Zed, for example, don't really rely on sustained DPS at all. But against sustained DPS champs like Aurelia versus Silas, champs like that, normally you will kind of outpace them in trades. So that means that like the only way for them to trade is like a long trade, but you generally win those, which is why Cassiopeia is so good against them. I will say the main difference of versing melee champions is probably the wave management in the early game. I think like it's really against like range champions, sometimes you want the wave to be in the middle, but against a melee champion, having the wave on your side, like as opposed to just in the middle, is extremely valuable. So against range champions, a lot of the time they can disengage from your trade. So we were like talking about Cinder before. It doesn't matter too much about where they are. So like, for example, if you freeze on Syndra all the way up here, if you try and chase her down no matter where she is, she can stun you, right? But for a lot of these melee champions, they don't have a way to get out, and a lot of them also don't have a way to CS from range. So if the wave is frozen on your side, if you can crash, say, 3 waves, and get it to bounce back, it'll be insanely valuable. You can see here, I mean, it's pretty much the same as the other lanes. Really, I'm just like slow pushing it in. I'm looking for harass when I can. I do think like one thing that you can do versus melee champions that you can't necessarily do versus ranged is you can deny CS a lot easier. Obviously, you can still deny CS versus range champs, but because melee champions have to be so scared of trading into you, oftentimes you can just like contest them for every single CS. And also, I would really advocate taking Ignite. This was the scrim last year, so you know it's a scrim, so I'm more likely to take TP, and also it was before the TP changes, but especially if I were playing solo queue, and especially this matchup, I would take Ignite, so don't worry too much about like the sums and stuff like that. I'd probably also start tier in this matchup these days. Yeah, this match is from last year, so it's like a little bit outdated, but I think the concepts are still sort of the same. Just skipping ahead a little bit, I hope you can see what I mean. Let me just actually go back a bit so you can see I've got this wave pushing towards me. I know Silas has a really hard time farming this from range, but if I can keep it on my side, it makes it very difficult for him, and also if he extends too far up, I can look for a W or an ult on him and possibly chase him down the lane. The only annoying thing here is he actually does have blue buff, so it's a bit easier for him to farm than normal. But you know, while he doesn't have blue buff, and you know, people don't get blue buffs in solo queue normally, it's going to be much more difficult for him. So you can see I can just kind of like chase him down, get a lot of free harass. If people do move into you like this, you actually don't need to worry at all. Even without my jungler there, I would have killed him. So if you just look, he's used his Q, he's used his E, and he W'd me as well. So he actually has no skill left here. The only thing he has left is E2, and he comes into me, and there's like, actually no way he wins this. Zinzel didn't even need to do anything there. But that's kind of like the power of Cassiopeia, right? Is that you can freeze the wave, then chase them down, and if they try and like trade back or get that CS, you can punish them. It's very easy to win those 1v1s as Cassiopeia. He's insanely strong in the laning phase, particularly against melee champions. So I'll go over one more example here. So this is against Akali. I think this one could be good because it's a bit different from the other melee. So I've played the early game sort of similar to the other ones. And this is a newer VOD. I think I played this like a week ago or something. So it is on, I think, 12.2. Yeah, I think it was on 12.2. But yeah, so champs like Akali and Zed are quite different because they're about burst rather than sustain. So when you play against these champs, it is quite important that you're in a place where they can't just like burst trade you and get out. So if you have room to like extended trade an Akali down the lane, you know, the matchup's quite easy, but if you're in a point where, say, you're under their tower, they just quickly trade on you, and you don't really have any way to chase them down. So against these kind of burst champions, I would say in the middle or on your side is good. The only reason I don't say on your side all the time is because a lot of these burst champs, like Akali and Zed, are very good at roaming. So you kind of want them more in the middle. You don't just want to give them free roam all the time. That being said, like if you can freeze the wave and know the rest of your team is safe, so they can't get roamed on, then it can be very good. Just kind of like this situation in general is something you want to avoid, like where I can't really walk up to those creeps because I know Akali can like all in me down the lane, but I know at the same time, if the situation's reversed and Akali's on my side of the lane, the opposite will happen. So you can see here, doing the same thing, I've taken a little bit of damage from when Nami came. but I'm just like trying to keep this wave close to my tower, and oftentimes you can actually like bait people here. Like, it is her mistake, right? Like, it wasn't really something I did in particular, but like that was a like pro player last year, so a lot of these like assassin players are gonna make mistakes, and Cassio is a champion that punishes mistakes in quite a weird way, almost like a delayed way. So let me kind of explain what I mean. If you get grounded against Cassiopeia, you know, by her W, you can't flash and you can't move. It's already too late. So you have to recognize it's a mistake kind of before you get punished for it. You know, like a lot of the other champs, like say you hit someone with a LeBlanc chain, right? Often they can just like flash out of it. They realize they've been hit by the LeBlanc chain, and then they still have time to react. But it's not really the case in Cassio. You like when you're against Cassio, you kind of have to anticipate what she's going to do, which makes this like extra level of counterplay, I guess, like more difficult for your opponent. So I guess, guys, just in general, overall for the laning phase, you want to keep the wave like in the middle or on your side most of the time, and I would highly recommend against roaming on Cassio unless it's really, really free. You can roam down the river, but I don't recommend full committing to other lanes. The reason for that is your wave clear is really poor and your movement speed is really slow, and your CC sucks if you're just like walking into a lane. And that being said, your 1v1, like pure 1v1, is very, very strong. Try and put your opponent in a position where you can like run them down the lane, and it'll be very easy. So hopefully that helped for the laning phase. Let me know if there's any other like things about the laning phase you want to know. I feel like I have so much experience in the champion that it's hard to like summarize all the games I've played into just like 30 minutes, but I've tried to like cover what I think were the main things, but there's probably like some stuff that I do without even thinking. So if there is anything else you guys want to know, just let me know. I'm going to do a little segment here on side laning on Cassio because I think it's actually a really kind of like core part of the champion. If you haven't watched my like Chovy CSing video, I'd really recommend going to that and just watching from the mid game onwards. It's timestamped in the description. That'll kind of make clearer some of the concepts, but if you don't watch it, hopefully I can explain it here anyway. So generally in the mid game, if you're a champion that's like strong, like wave clear wise, or it's split pushing in general, it's really important that you go on the side wave and the side lane. And it's the reason this is good on Cassio is because you're extremely good at 1v1s, and you also farm camps very quickly. So that means that you can like accelerate yourself ahead of the game and like draw a lot of pressure for your team and help create like uneven number fights. So you can see here when I come out of base, I immediately go to match Urgot and the bot wave. So this is going to be, I can gain the most farm here, I can farm the bot wave, I can farm camps, and if I play well, I can also farm the Urgot. So there's very few champions that can 1v1 Cassio unless you're like kind of behind or they're like really strong 1v1 champs. So oftentimes if you open up with an ult on someone like this, they have pretty much no counterplay to you, and you'll see that a lot of other, you know, when you push the side lane, normally you have to be scared of getting ganked, right? You know, I think that goes without saying. And the other thing that you kind of need to be careful about is being 1v1. So for Cassio, or for some champs, the way they kind of like get away with this is they're not scared of ganks because they have lots of mobility. But Cassio is definitely not that. So the way you deal with ganks on Cassio is simply you gotta kill them. If people come and you know it's two people, you gotta kill them both. That's pretty much all there is to it. Cassio has no way of like escaping stuff, but there's very few people that can 1v1 you, and there's actually very few people that can 1v2 you either. So, you know, whenever you get some stupid fucking jungler coming at you like that, you just kill them. You know, you don't got to worry about them. Basically, you want to push the wave to the tower whenever you can before you start moving mid. And if you can find any camps kind of like on the way, those can be really good. You know, dragons even can be a good camp. Basically, guys, I would really recommend watching that Chovy Akali CSing video because I think like that shows how you should play the side lane in general, but it is different on Cassio because the way you're doing it is that you're just like essentially pushing, knowing you're going to get ganked, as opposed to pushing and knowing you can get away from the gank. And I think that's a pretty big difference. To show you again from later in the game, I walk out of base and I go to the Krugs because I want to go to that bot wave. I think, can you guys see the map? Yeah, you guys can see it. So coming out on the map, I come in, clear these Krugs, and I can do this because I have a lot of time. I push the wave all the way under the tower beforehand, and then I'm going to go to that bot wave. This is just like the most efficient. As you can see, Cassio clears camps very quickly and she has a lot of mana. So I can always like clear that and still come to the bot wave. So here, even though I know Urgot's here, I know I can 1v1 Urgot without too much trouble, especially because he's weak. And also, if you look on the minimap, all of these bot camps are spawning, which is really juicy. I actually already cheesed this guy like this, so I feel a bit bad that I just cheesed him in the exact same way. Yeah, it is a bit closer than I expected because I did miss one Q, so that's pretty important. And I guess just like, you gotta remember, guys, if you miss spells, that sucks generally. I actually should have kept split pushing here. I wasn't sure where they were at the time, but like upon like looking at this game again, I actually would have kept going there. I would have like gone to their bot jungle and taken all those camps and just lifestealed off them. So yeah, that could have been another option. This year I'll show you guys one more quick example so you can see the entire enemy team is grouped mid. I come bot so I can push this wave in. I'm not going to speak too much about this, and the reason is I feel like split pushing is like, it's like a general thing rather than a cast specific thing, so I don't want to make this whole video about split pushing because I feel like it's only for Cassio. That being said, I think like side laning and split pushing in general is something I want to do like more on, because I think it's like really misunderstood for mid laners. And also, I think, like, again, if you do want to know more about it, I'll plug this again. I really think my Chovy, like, Akali CSing video, specifically the mid-game, if you just go to the timestamps and watch from the mid-game onwards, I can teach you a lot about side laning until I have, like, a more in-depth video about it. But if a lot of the time, this, like, helps you keep your CS up in the mid-game, and it can also get you, like, a lot more gold. So it's really important that you don't neglect side laning as Cassio. You know, it can be really easy to not do because, like, one, you're really strong in team fighting, but also because you feel vulnerable on the side wave. But if you do it at the right times and you kind of get over that fear of it, and I actually do think it is a fear for a lot of people, like, you kind of have to fail at this a few times, honestly. Like, you will, like, over push and get caught on the sideline a few times, and that's okay. You just gotta, like, learn and get better at it, because once you do, it'll make your game so different. You'll have, like, consistent higher CS, fights will go better for you, and you'll just be like in a better position to carry games way more often. So the way team fighting kind of works on Cassio, you do play a lot like an AD carry, where you like kite back, but there is like a few things to it. You need to be really like good about when you kind of turn the fight around. So initially as Cassio, you kind of like kite back and you hit like whichever target's in front of you, basically, because you don't really have a choice otherwise. But there will generally be that like turning point in the fight where you can like either chase them down, where you can flash forward. So it's really important that you like recognize that like turning point in the fight. But for the most part, you do just play like a general control mage. I don't think team fighting on Cassio is anything different really than other mages. I guess the only difference really is that you do kind of have that engage tool in your flash ult, but also that you're short range, and you really have to rely on like your own tools to kind of keep yourself safe. You know, you got your ult for self peel, you got your W for self peel, and you also have your Q movement speed. It's really important that you're using those and dodging skill shots in order to keep yourself alive. You can see here the enemy team is engaging into us, which is what Cassio wants. The fight starts with Nautilus ult being used on someone else, so a lot of the threat is already gone from me, and I can walk forward pretty safely and just DPS down this Nautilus. So already the fight is starting to turn. You can see they're running away. I'm here really looking for an opportunity to like flash ult or to chase people down. You can see here with 3 people like stacked up, even though I couldn't get the stun on to any of them, I did manage to kill off that Trundle and get the slow onto 2 people. So this fight, I'd say this is like the most simple example maybe, or just like a very generic fight, but let's find a few more examples. Not every team fight is going to start kind of in like a basic front to back situation, so I'll show you one where it was like kind of a bit more confusing. This game I actually am pretty fed, but we're not like insanely ahead of the enemy team. So they come here to contest us off the Baron. Now you can see at first, what I say in kind of like all these control mage team fighting kind of videos is the most important things are that you're hitting the right targets and you're avoiding the threats. Now as Cassio, this is a lot more difficult because for one, you can't always hit the right target. Because you're very short ranged, oftentimes you just have to hit whatever target's in front of you. And also because you are so immobile, you have to think a lot more about what the threats are. So in this game, the main threats to me are Ziggs skill shots and Nautilus Q. So here when Nautilus is walking up, I kind of just like kite back from him, and I throw like a little bit of damage on him and kind of just like let the Baron finish him off. Other threats to me, I think the Shen taunt is pretty problematic, but the only person that really does damage here is the Ziggs. So that's like, even if I get hit by the CC, as long as the Ziggs isn't hitting me and he is pretty low on mana, I'm not too bad. So I managed to get Ziggs out of this fight here. And here I do something maybe not recommended, but if you play well, you can pull it off. So here I split completely from the rest of my team, but I'm actually kiting towards my Camille's TP. Oh, you guys can't see this, hold on. So I'm kiting towards my Camille's TP on the map, and so I managed to get this this ult onto the Yone, and that gives me a lot of lifesteal. So you actually see my health goes from what, like 40% I think to about 60%, and that's really important. You rely on this like extra lifesteal during fights, and so even though the Shen taunts me, again I'm managing to heal off him, and so I live this fight on very low HP. And you can see that if I had been hit by one more skill shot, if I'd been you know, a Nor Q or a Ziggs Q or something like that, the fight would have been very, very hard. So again, I'm not going to spend a huge time on team fighting for Cassio because I feel like it's something that is kind of shared between all control mages. It's just like the same basics of like kiting back, using your spells like effectively, just all those things like staying with your team, avoiding threats, hitting high priority targets. But on Cassio, it's really those concepts like turned up to 11. You really get punished harder if you don't execute on them, but you also get rewarded like much more if you execute on them by putting out just like ridiculous amounts of damage. Okay, so I'll show you guys one more team fight. So one thing I get from people a lot is that they struggle to carry when they're like the only person on the team that matters, essentially. So in this game, I'm playing a scrim. I can move my cam back over, actually. So in this game, I'm playing a scrim, and I'm 10-0 on Cassio, but the kills are actually even. So from what I remember, we are slightly ahead in this game, but it's not like overwhelmingly. Mainly, all the gold is in Cassio, and I'm actually not at this fight yet. So when you're like the one threat, it's really important that you use your flash well. When you're like in a mobile champ like Cassio, flash is like your one chance to kind of it's like a get out of jail free card, and I wouldn't recommend flash ulting aggressively that much if you're this fed, unless you know you're not going to die immediately afterwards, because a lot of the time, if you're this fed, you're going to like out damage them anyway, right? So the only thing you need to care about is not dying. If the fight goes longer, it's better for you, whereas if you're more even or more behind, you might need that like big engage to really turn the tide of the fight. Let's watch this one. At the start of the fight, a couple people die for free, and it doesn't look too good, but the enemy Rumble dies. So here, I want to kind of show a couple like key concepts. So the main threat in the enemy team right now is actually this Cogmore. So this Cogmore is like really strong from what I remember. And also the Lucian is like reasonably strong. I think he's 3 items, and he's level 16. So I did flash forward here because I thought I could get the Lucian, but the main reason I felt safe doing this is because, one, this Morgana is zoning off 3 people, and also because I'm flashing next to one of my teammates. So it's not like I'm flashing in 1v5, I'm actually flashing like sort of with my team, I'm in line with them. So here, the set takes Lee over the wall, and I think this is quite an important distinction as well. So Set is the closest target, so that is normally the person you would hit, but I also recognize in the moment that Lucian is the more valuable target. So Lucian really doesn't expect me after this Q to ult him and to actually chase him with Q instead. So this is actually, I would say, probably the turning point of the fight, is when Lucian makes this mistake, because he thinks that I'm just going to be hitting Set, but actually I just managed to get a stun on Set and take out the Lucian. So you can actually see, even though I've had like a few people on me, I've like barely taken any damage this fight, and that's because at all times I kept their main threat away from me, and I took out the rest. So the only 2 people I care about are this Lee and Cogmore, and I managed to isolate one of them, stay with my team, and stay away from the other one that's kind of like tough to deal with. I didn't have to deal with both of their threats at once. So obviously I am really fed in this clip, and like if you get this fed on Cassio, you are like a turbo 1v9 machine. But I thought it was important to kind of just like explain to you guys like a bit more about like the game knowledge behind carrying fights. You can see, obviously, even though I'm like way more fed than this Cogmore, he actually does quite a lot of damage, especially if I get CC'd. So in general, guys, I'm probably not going to show any more teamfight examples. I think Cassio's teamfighting is very similar to other team fighters, so I'll quickly like summarize it. But if you do kind of like want to know, I guess, like more about teamfighting, I'd actually recommend checking out like all my champion guides and just like watching the teamfight section. They're all timestamped. So yeah, I guess if you really wanted to know more about team fighting, go check those out. But I think it's like Cassio's team fighting is very general. So if you're good at team fighting on any champion, you're probably going to be good at team fighting on Cassio. So in summary, the main things on Cassio are to kite back with your team, stay like with your team if possible, and to hit the target that's kind of close to you. You can, if you like have a way, you can hit high value targets. Obviously it's better, if you can find a way to ult them or just to get damage on them, that's really valuable. Flash usage on Cassio is quite important. You can like flash aggressively and turn a fight. Alternatively, you can make it very difficult for people to kill you if you do have your flash. Other than that, for team fighting, I think a lot of it is just going to be your mechanics. Like I said before, because Cassio is so short range, you really need to be on point with dodging skill shots. And Cassio does have the tools to do that. She has like a lot of movement speed, right? You saw in some of those fights before, maybe not the one I just showed you, but if I had been hit by one like key skill shot or one like key crowd control ability, the fight actually would have been completely different. So Cassio really rewards like not just mechanics, but also like I don't know what the word is, like maybe prediction or forethought. Like if you can see how the fight's gonna play out, you see like, oh, Not's gonna throw this hook here, Sona's gonna flash ult here. If you can like see all that like in your mind before the fight starts, you can have, or not before the fight starts, like while the fight's happening, it can be a lot easier for you. And I'll actually quickly say that One thing theshy said, maybe I can find the interview and link it or something, but he said that a lot of people think of theshy as a mechanical player, but he sees himself as like a strategical player because he like plans team fights like ahead of time, and he like knows what's going to happen. And I think that's like really important team fighting skill in general. A lot of people see champs like Cassio and just like assume that all there is to it is mechanics, but really a lot of mechanical skill comes from like seeing that in time. Like simply put, reactions is not going to be enough all the time. So if you can actively like think about how you want the team fight to play out and how the team fight will play out and all that kind of like stuff ahead of time, it can be really beneficial to you, especially when you're playing these like short range mages like Cassiopeia or Rise. Alright, last of all is Cassio's matchup. So in general, Cassio does very well against like melee champions, short range champions, or champs that really need like sustained trades. Against all these sort of things, like Cassio either like makes life really difficult for them with like her W, or like just like with the way she trades. That being said, in general, long range is very difficult for Cassio. So like particularly mage champions are quite difficult. You know, champs like Victor, Syndra, Anivia, stuff like that can be very hard. But a lot of these matchups can be won if you play very well. The reason I have Victor as the hardest is actually because Victor doesn't really have skill shots. So champs like Syndra, Ori, Lux, you can actually dodge a lot of their abilities. But Victor, as long as a Victor is like at least somewhat human, he should be able to hit like 90% of his E's. And I've never lost the Victor versus Cassio matchup. That's just like in general very hard for Cassio. Victor has a lot of advantages over you, so those are kind of the hardest. In the kind of middle tier are champs where like either the matchup is close or you might struggle against ganks. So like for example like LeBlanc, you can like win the 1v1 against LeBlanc like reasonably easy, but you're very gankable because you're immobile, so champs like that can be sort of difficult. I will actually say some of these champs down here can actually be very difficult out of lane. So I'll use Corki as an example. So in lane, Cassio does extremely well into Corki, and during kind of like the early mid game, Cassio does quite well against Corki too because she has a lot of sustain. But in the late game, Corki's range is just like way too high for Cassio. So while I would say this is like a free matchup, you might actually find this difficult. And I would say that like I would probably choose this matchup in solo queue, but I'd actually probably not choose it in competitive. So that's just kind of like, a lot of these things aren't just, you know, black and white. You don't just like win the entire game, you don't just lose the entire game. They can change a lot over the game. I also think a lot of them, you're kind of like, the way the matchup goes for you will vary a lot on how good you are at Cassio, and also just like if you buy the right items and take the right sums. So, you know, for some champs, if you don't take Ignite, or you don't take Cleanse, or you don't take Exhaust in the right time, the matchup will be a lot more difficult for you. Another thing I'll say is that a lot of these matchups that are considered easy, they can snowball very hard against you. So for example, if you fall behind against Katarina or Kassadin, the game can be very difficult. But if you don't fall behind, the game is very easy. So a lot of Cassio's matchups are very, very volatile, where if you're winning, you'll just like completely destroy them. And if they're winning, they'll completely destroy you. I wouldn't say Cassio is a very forgiving champion, but I think the way I would use Cassio would be as a counter pick most of the time. If you do want to one tricker, like you can, you'll just have to get very good at playing these difficult matchups. There are also some matchups where it's very important that you use your skills kind of like for a certain thing. So for example, against Lucian and Akshan, the way you use your W is very, very important. And if you waste it, often you'll get punished really hard. If you don't know how to play any of these matchups, like obviously you can ask in the comments, or you can watch like a video on just like the matchup. I guess one thing to remember, guys, is like I do rate Cassio really highly. Like she's a really fun champ. I think she's really strong. But also I've played Cassio for a very, very long time. I've played like 2,000 games. I've played her since season 5. So a lot of these things that I might find easy or second nature might be quite difficult for you. And I've tried to like make it as objective as possible. But sometimes when I look at other people's like Cassio matchup tier list, I'm thinking like, dude, are you smoking crack? Like, what are you thinking? Like that matchup's so easy. But yeah, so it's gonna depend a lot. But I'll do my best to like answer anything in the questions below. Yeah. Okay, guys. So that does it for my Cassio guide. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I think it might be my longest one yet. I have a lot to say about Cassio, and to be honest, I'm not even sure I covered it all in this video. I think Cassio is a champ where I might actually have to upload some VODs of my own and kind of like talk about them individually, maybe some like full-length gameplay VODs, because I feel like I'm not sure if it's because you know, the reason is because Cassie was just complex or because I've like played her for so long. But I just feel like there's so much knowledge to her, and I've tried my best to like simplify and, you know, put it all in like a way that's like easy to understand. But I just feel like there's so much stuff that I've like built up over the years. But either way, I hope it was helpful. Let me know if you guys do kind of want that like full like gameplay, you know, either like VODs taken from stream where it's just like the whole game and I've commented over it, or just like me reviewing some of the games I've played in the past, just like explaining everything I'm doing. I think it might be helpful to have that sort of thing like paired with the in-depth guide, so that like if you feel like you really just need to see some gameplay after it, like you can go look at that. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of that. If you liked, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.